Bharat, my first question is like, what inspired you to become a filmmaker? Like, why you choose filmmaking?
So for me, I think it stems from storytelling. Uh, in that way, I was always so I was even when I was a kid, I wasn't very good at my other school subjects, and it was always I think I had this sort of I liked telling stories, and I've been raised in an environment. My parents are writers, and so my grandmother was a teacher of English literature. So there was always some form of storytelling. I was exposed to a lot of stories. So I'd say it began as me wanting to be a writer. And in fact, later on, I did make a career out of writing, not writing fiction and things like that. But I worked as a copywriter. I worked with the news, where I used to. My first job actually was writing scripts for the news, and so it sort of comes from there. Um, yeah, I'd say it comes from this some kind of desire to tell stories of some kind. You know, that's where it. If I had to pin it down to one thing, that's what it would be. Yeah.
So, like, during your childhood, like, you were interested in something else in your hobbies, or you were interested in dancing or something else?
Um, so, I mean, as a kid, childhood, I was always interested. I would draw a lot, and writing and drawing were sort of the two main things that I was interested in. There were other things like some music and um, maybe some sports, but I wasn't. I was not a very athletic kid in the sense had a lot of energy, but I was never very uh, good at sports either. Uh, I enjoyed playing, but never to consider it as any sort of career or anything like that. Uh, I had a strength. My biggest strength, I'd say, was writing, and I sort of wanted to capitalize on that, especially with school, where there is a lot of emphasis put on math, physics, chemistry, and there was this whole wave, right? And everyone wanted to be an engineer, and that was sort of the path that was popular at the time. So the only thing that I could identify, especially through my school journey, was writing, and I didn't know if that was even a viable career option. Both my parents, who were writers, told me, "Don't be a writer. There's no money." Uh, they said, "You can't. Don't do it." In the sense, don't do that to yourself. Uh, so yeah, I mean, but yeah, I mean, that's what I finally landed on. So I guess things just worked out in some way. Also, I mean, it became a more viable career option with advertising and things like that, where you could make money off of writing. Because I think earlier it was always so you have to write news articles, or you want to write books, and then you need to have, if you're writing books, then the books have to sell. And I think it's the same situation we find ourselves in today. And even with films, you got to make a film, and then you got to sell the film, and it's complicated. But I think there are a lot more opportunities today than there were in the past. I'm sure arguments can be made for it and against it, but yeah, at least they're more viable as a career now. Maybe even being a writer is more viable. I don't know if AI is taking that away a little bit, but uh, but yeah, certainly, yeah. Like I said, there are. I think arguments can be made for both sides.
And if you don't score like good marks, where your parents were like strict about it, or they're like, it's fine.
No, no, they were strict about it. Uh, I I think even I think the world changed a lot. Say in the 2000s, especially. Technology sort of changed a lot of things. Cameras became more accessible. the computer did a lot of things for us. It gave us a lot of uh, access, and it skilled us in certain ways that they could not imagine. So yeah, I mean, they were strict. I was always going for math classes and chem classes and science classes and all that. And yeah, it didn't help. None of it helped really.
So what did you study like during your graduation days?
Uh, Graduation is my the I did my BA in college, but before that I did do science, 11th and 12th, ISC, which really were two really bad years of my life. Was the science in 11th and 12th, where I really struggled. And then the moment I finished school, I was like, no, I'm not touching science ever. Even though I enjoyed science, it's just I wasn't very good at doing the exams and things like that. I enjoyed the subjects, but so I did my Bachelor of Arts, and I did it in the equivalent of mass comm. So yeah, again, this was also me sort of, since I was good at English, I sort of said, okay, let's do that. And then there were, it also, even though we didn't have a film, we had film as one small component. We had film, radio, TV, and things like that. I wouldn't say it really helped me to a large extent. But what it did do is it gives you that amount of time. Like you said, you want to sort of dedicate this time to, say, reading and watching films. With films, luckily, I was raised in a house where I was exposed to cinema from a very young age. But it gives you this time to sort of focus on things, actually spend time reading and figuring out what you're interested in. You don't really know it at the time as a kid, but yeah, I'm glad that I did spend a lot of time doing it. Yeah, in my college years. Yeah.
So it was in your like graduation days you found out you want to become a filmmaker.
Oh no, much before. I was so even when I was a kid, we would me and a lot of family friends, we'd have gatherings, and during those times there were some families that owned camcorders, right, like video cameras, uh, and so as kids we'd all sit and we'd try and make films, and we'd basically try and imitate what we saw online, not online, what we saw on TV. We were trying to imitate the films that we saw, so we're trying to sort of tell stories of some kind which we all enjoyed. I had a group of friends who were also interested in similar things like telling stories, drawing comics. Used to do all this, um, and but at that point, filmmaking was never a viable option uh, uh, as a career option in the sense because tech hadn't caught up, and even the films we were making were very rough, and you know we'd and then we got access to more camcorders, or they up one of the families would upgrade their camcorders, so we'd have two camcorders, so we try multiple camera setups, and we'd also try editing the films based on whatever software we had available at the time. I think I think Windows ME came with this thing called Windows Movie Maker, which was really oh, it was amazing. It was really intuitive, and it would crash a lot, but I'd say I sort of learned how to edit on Windows Movie Maker. We used to do these things. There was this, I think it's making a resurgence now, the show called Dragon Ball Z. And we would get, what we would do is we would make music videos. There was this trend of making music videos out of anime, and a lot of Dragon Ball Z uh, footage cut to songs at the time, right? So a lot of Linkin Park songs cut with Dragon Ball Z footage, and I mean, it was a lot of fun, and we'd go on trying to make it better and trying to make it slicker. And uh, but this sort of taught me how to use this software to a large extent. And whatever we'd learn doing these things, we'd also try and incorporate into our the films we were trying to make. And so this interest in filmmaking was came very early on, but after college it was still not. People would It was very vague, right? You ask people, "Oh, I want to be a filmmaker," and they'd be like, "Go to Bombay." And go to Bombay and do what? Right? I mean, and go and assist somebody. It was all very vague, at least to me at the time. And uh, so I started off. I said, okay, let's begin with writing and see where that takes me. Maybe that can be an entry into film, because writing is a component of film. But so yeah, it came from there in that sense. It wasn't in college. Basically, in college was when I started making films more seriously, because we'd had to make a diploma film, and it also gave me the time to sort of mess around with cameras and also try and take it a little more seriously. Uh, try and tell stories that are not, because when we were making home videos, we were doing a lot of spoofs. We were doing comedy. Comedy was our main thing. Try and make people laugh, and we try to do it a little more seriously, in the sense maybe still make people laugh, but try and be a little more disciplined about it. And so college helped with that. But I started it's only a few years after college, because after college I worked with the news, I worked with advertising, and then I joined a production house, and it took off from there, basically. Yeah.
So how the idea came for the road to Kuthriyar?
Oh, the road to Kuthriyar. Um, okay. Right. So I had, so my father and I, we've always we've been discussing this idea of docu-fiction, right? This idea of where, because one of the biggest things with films is you need a big budget to make a film, or you need a considerable amount of money. Even a low budget film is a lot of money. Um, so we were always sort of toying with the idea of where you use a place and the people in the place uh, for what they are and for what it is, and you try and weave a story around it. So you aren't spending on things like sets, you aren't spending too much on actors, you don't have to coach them. uh, you sort of draw from the milieu. uh, and this was an idea we had, and I'd keep discussing it with him, and every time something came up, we'd see whether there was an opportunity to sort of try out something or the other, and see if it made sense. And the road to Kuthriyar, what happened was, the protagonist of the film, Dhruv, is actually a friend of mine from college, and he so me and my cinematographer, we'd been working together for a couple of years. We just made a short film in Gokarna, set in Gokarna, and we tried this out. We tried this docufiction out, where we just recruited people and we made this little short. And we were quite excited by it, and we wanted to see whether we could take it to a larger scale, right? And it happened very just by chance, because my cinematographer happened to move to Kodaikanal, and in Tamil Nadu, and he ran into Dhruv. He didn't know that Dhruv and I knew each other, and Dhruv basically was conducting this survey. He was actually conducting this survey, and he needed to maintain a blog, and he wanted uh, my cinematographer, to help him shoot some footage for his blog, basically. So my cinematographer got in touch with me saying that maybe we can make a documentary about this guy. What he's doing is insane. And then I find out it's Dhruv, and I've known him a very long time. So, and I knew he was doing something in that area. So I went and visited them, and then we explored the possibility of a documentary. But we realized that a documentary would not make sense, because this guy was on this survey in the middle of the forest, and we just couldn't. It was too taxing. It would take too much time, and we he wouldn't wait for us, because he had goals that he had to meet. and it's really thick forest. It's, man, it's really oh, it's, I consider myself to be reasonably sort of fit. With, I trek and all that, but that was something else. So it was out of the question. We couldn't be lugging gear, and we couldn't be taking large number of people into the forest, because there was me, there was the cinematographer. We'd at least need two more people aside from Dhruv and Dorai, who's his actual guide, who's guiding him through the forest. So in fact, it was quite, I was quite perplexed by the whole thing, and then I came back to Bangalore at the time, and I was again, I was discussing the whole thing with my dad. I was showing him footage, and then we revisited this idea of saying, okay, let's do the docu fiction, because the kind of access we got through Dhruv was crazy. Dhruv has spent a huge amount of time in that region, and Dhruv is the kind of guy who makes friends like that. He's a very personable guy, and he just makes friends with all kinds of people. He can have a conversation with absolutely anyone. So he knew all these villagers, and we were just hanging out with people in the tribal settlement. We were hanging out with villagers, and all through, not just in Kuthriyar, but all the way up to Kodaikanal. And Dhruv would be like, hey, you'll be driving along the road, and there'll be some man grazing his goats. Be like, hey, man, that's my friend. And he'd stop, and he'd go and he'd start talking to the guy, and he'd talk to him for half an hour. So it was great, the kind of access we got. And so we said, okay, let's do this. And so I sat with Dhruv, and I asked him about all the interesting people he could think of in the region. And so he'd just reel off these people, and he'd be like, this guy, oh, so in Kuthriyar there's a dam, and then there's a guy who's in charge of locking the gates. There's somebody else who grazes goats in the forest. There's somebody else who uses donkeys to do something else. And he just reeled off for a while. And so basically, I used all these characters, and then we used Dhruv. And Dhruv was also interested in acting. He's always been interested in acting. So all of it sort of came together for this docu fiction idea that had been brewing for a while. And yeah, it fell into place. Yeah, and it worked out. Yeah.
Like, great, great. What was your experience like? Did you face any difficulties while making it?
Yeah, lots. It was, so we were a tiny crew. For the first half of the film, there was just aside from Dhruv and Dorai, there was just me, the cinematographer, and one person doing sound. So it was the three of us, and you don't get phone signal. You don't. Logistics are an issue. Getting food is not so easy. Um, the region works like wherever you're staying will work on its own rhythm, and you have to adjust to that rhythm. You can't make demands on it, so you have to be really accommodating. We also were working on a tiny budget. It was very small. So these were like hugely problematic things. uh, on one level, on a very basic level, we were dealing with these things. There was also things like when you're casting people from the area, they will not, their sense of time is not really the same sense of time that you have coming from the city. It's, people will and people don't, uh, if they say I will turn up at a certain amount of at a certain time, they will not come, or they will have unforeseen issues. Say somebody doesn't tie up their cow, and it runs off into the forest. The guy is not going to turn up for shoot. Another problem is people get drunk. So many times people wouldn't show up, or they'd show up very drunk. And so these are like some of the challenges that we had to face while doing it. And of course, we weren't. There are other things like the entire region. There are lots of elephants. So if you are shooting at night, you'd have, you'd suddenly hear people shouting, and maybe the elephants around, and you have to be careful. You realize that you have to be careful about this as well. I mean, very briefly, like these were some of the problems we had. Also, during the second half, we got on one more person, which was a second camera person. So we were a crew of four, and then Dhruv and Durai. So we were a crew of six. Um, and I remember we were staying. So in the road to Kuthriyar, there is this nursery that Dhruv arrives at. Um, and we were staying there. That was basically our base when we were in Kuthriyar, and we had a tree fell and broke the water pipes and cut the electricity, and we didn't have power and we didn't have running water. So we had to get water. We had to make sure, and all of us are using this one bathroom. We're sleeping outdoors, but we've got one toilet. So it was a challenge in that sense, because without electricity, you have to charge gear, right? Like you need a laptop to transfer footage. You need batteries for your cameras. And there's one chai shop in Kuthriyar where we land up with all these spike busters, and there'd be one slot in the wall, and then we'd go spike buster into that, then spike buster into this spike buster, and we had this array of gear that was charging. But the people were very accommodating because they knew Dhruv so well, and yeah, I mean, we pulled it off. But yeah, it was certainly challenging.
Okay. So talking about the budget, like how did you find producer, or were like you were producing the film?
So I produced the film. um, Uh, the thing was to make it within something I could afford. I, in the sense, it was so I put in a small amount of money, but I borrowed from my folks. Uh, they believed in it enough to say, "Yeah, go ahead, come on. You know there is a film here. You can make it, and we can afford to give you the money." So, yeah, I mean, the short answer is, yeah, I produced it.
If somebody wants to produce a film like this, how much budget, approximate budget, will it cost?
So this is tricky, but I'd say if you can make an indie film, or a film like this, these are specific circumstances because you need someone like Dhruv, you need that sort of access. But to make an indie film, I'd say if you ask me, I'd say somewhere between 30 and 40 lakhs, you should be able to make an indie film. If you put everything in one location, you could do it for even lesser than that. Uh, but yeah, a feature film, I'd say 30 lakhs at least to pull it off, because there's also finally when you there's also a post production element, right? You do have to grade it, you've got to get a sound mix, you've got to all these things. Even if people give you discounts, you will have to put aside a certain chunk of money for it. So it's going to cost you a certain amount of money no matter what. Uh, Basically, with the Road to Kuthriyar, I had a lot of people work for me at no cost or at greatly reduced costs. People who, um, like me, we want to make a feature film. Before I made the Road to Kuthriyar, I'd written a script and I was sort of trying to meet producers, and it's a really disheartening experience, right? It's horrible. Uh, and people will ask you all sorts of ridiculous things. I remember I met quite a prominent director who's made like 5 6 films, and I was asking him, how do you fund your films? And he told me, I made 6 films, I still can't get funding for my next film. uh, and the producer will ask you, okay, if you can guarantee that you will get national award, I'll fund it, but you have to guarantee that I get the award. And so it's unreasonable whatever the ask is, right? And this is quite tricky, because say you are putting down a huge chunk of money on something, unless you are able to see the cultural value or artistic value of something, everything comes down to money, right? So you have to make something that sells. So it's quite uh, tricky, this whole thing. I think the thing, especially in India, is for a large part. I'm not saying with everyone, but the people who are funding the films aren't really the people who are watching the films, so they don't understand. If they treat it like an investment, it's it's different, and it will sort of there will be consequences for the product that you're making, which is this film, right? You as a filmmaker come about it going about some artistic expression and all this stuff. That guy doesn't give a damn. He uh, he wants to know, and it's not about making. If you spent x amount of money, 2x is not enough. You want to make 10x. So it I think it's quite unreasonable. And we don't really have public funding in India, unlike many other parts of the world. We don't have public funding for the arts. I think NFDC is the only one, if I'm not mistaken, in India, which does give you money. Uh, yeah, they have an open call and you can. NFDC is very helpful, but I think we need more bodies like uh, NFDC sort of promoting the arts.
And how much time it took to complete the film? Like, specifically shooting, editing, post production.
So with this film, I was editing it. I edited the film myself, and I knew I couldn't afford an editor, and I had planned to edit it from the start. People will tell you that you should never edit the film that you direct. Yeah, but yeah, you'll hear this a lot. But yeah, I mean, there's for me there was no option that I couldn't afford an editor. Um, but so I wrote the film. We did our first recce in 2018. The script was written over 2018. In 2019, we began filming, Feb 2019. We wanted to wrap by June 2021. Because also what happened was, because these are first time actors, Dhruv actually his performances improved considerably as he got more comfortable with the camera. So there were a lot of reshoots we wanted to do. The aim was to, and then since we're also working with people uh, who are not who are working at a reduced fee or working for no money at all, I had to work around their schedules as opposed to saying, okay, we're going to shoot from here to here. And so working around other people's schedules, we had finally landed on June 2021. But then the pandemic hit, so it got delayed. And I think we finished in November 2021 filming. And the completed film was, no, sorry, November 2020 is when we finished, and then October 2021 is when the film was completed. That's with everything done. So I edited it over the lockdowns. Please, yeah, that's what kept me sane to the lockdowns. Yeah.
So, like, while completing the film, which process, writing, shooting, or editing, which process you like the most or enjoy the most?
Oh, so I think I also freelance as an editor. So I really love the editing process. But I think the best part is the actual filming of the film itself, the shooting of the film, and the stuff we had to do to pull certain things off and everything. You're losing the whenever you're not working with too many lights. So you're if you're in scenes where you're depending on natural light, you're always losing light. So there'd be times where we're losing light and we need to get something at a certain time. It's very frustrating. In hindsight, that is the best part of the film, of making it. In hindsight, though, right? When it's actually happening, it's really frustrating and it's nerve wracking. But I'd say, yeah, that's probably the best part of the film. And it's also because you're interacting with all kinds of people, right? People you're interact apart from your crew, you're interacting with actors, and it starts raining, and then you have to take shelter in a cow shed, or in a cave somewhere, or something like that, because of the nature of the place, the environment in which we're shooting. That's amazing. uh, but in hindsight, always, yeah.
So, as you said, like Dhruv was acting first and he's not an actor. and there were villagers who were acting. So how do you give them direction to do this and to how do you make them act?
So I don't, at least with this film, and this is I'm also fresh in this whole exercise. It's not I hadn't been doing it for a long time or anything of the sort. So my thinking was at least okay. We know they behave in certain ways, so can we let them be themselves and use that to our advantage? Because we didn't, in fact, people were not camera conscious at all. We were using a tiny camera. We shot it on an A7 III, which is which is like a wedding camera. It's not very intrusive, so people were just, I mean, I didn't have trouble with them at all, uh, at all, really, except for the fact that sometimes people would get very drunk, but that was the only problem I had. With regard to them acting, I was quite pleased, and people were also very ready. uh, no, I think apart from one person, everybody was willing to act and be part of it, and that way it wasn't as challenging as I imagined it to be.
So are you currently doing any other project, shooting something, writing?
So I've got a few things that I'm working on. One of them is a web series, and I this time I'm working with producers, and we'll see. They're all very early in their stages. There are a couple of documentary projects, and there's also another fiction film that I have written, which I'm trying to let's see. I mean, I'm trying to get some people interested in it, and it's the same long process that there's not so much docu fiction happening here, but yeah, I mean, there are a whole bunch of things. I think basically all filmmakers, at least for the most part, will always have a few projects that if they've got sitting on this shelf, and you start working on something, and if it doesn't get any traction, you put it aside, work on sometimes something will come your way, so you start working on that. There's also commissioned work where you work for hire, which will keep coming up. I mean, in an ideal world, it will keep coming up, and it keeps you uh, at least make sure you don't go hungry. uh, but and I work with a lot with documentary films, so there's not that much money in documentary film. It's okay, it's not terrible, but yeah, it's not as much as ad films, for example. But it's fun. You travel a lot and you meet a lot of people, uh, and then those bring up ideas. So there are a whole bunch of ideas that are there in the projects that are stuck at some stage or the other. um, but yeah, that there are a bunch of things, and hopefully I can put certain things into action soon.
So if you could recommend few films, your favorite films and filmmakers.
Oh,
It's a list.
like so there are lots of films. I'm a big fan of filmmakers. I really like David Lynch. I like David Cronenberg. I like uh, I like Aki Kaurismäki. I also like, and of course there are always, if you pick your the list of greats, there's always people like Michelangelo Antonioni, and there is Buñuel, who are great filmmakers, and uh, they are people I would recommend. But in the I over the last in more recent times, the films that I really like, there's this one called Close Your Eyes by Victor Enrique, which is one of my favorite films of the last and maybe decade or so. And there's this other one called Beanpole by this guy called Kantemir Balagov, or which both these films are. I really enjoyed them. I think Close Your Eyes is a more mature film, but Beanpole is terrific. Like I loved it. Um, yeah, I mean, if I also I like some of Junho Bong's earlier work. There are lots. I mean, it's very hard for me to just put down a list of people, but in recent times, I've been interested especially like I really enjoyed David Lynch's Twin Peaks season 3. I really enjoyed it. Twin Peaks 1 and 2 are okay, but 3 I thought was amazing. Which gave me, it's quite inspiring in that sense. It's debatable to it's a big debate to figure out what the series is about, but that's what the that's the fun part, I suppose. um Other than that, I don't know. I mean, I get
Any
nothing just
Indian,
comes to mind. Pardon
any
me?
Indian, any Indian
Oh,
films?
Indian films. I actually I really enjoyed Chaitanya Tamhani's Court. I liked Ram Reddy's Tithi. I also liked there's this Malayalam filmmaker called Sanal Kumar Shashidharan. Uh, he made this film. I forget the name of it, but it's set in the mountains and it's about this group that goes trekking in the hills, which was quite interesting. He's also made this film called Sexy Durga, which is a strange film, but it's really but it's quite interesting. What he's at least what he's trying to do. I also like there's this guy from Bangalore called Prithvi Konanur. He's made this film called Seventeeners, which I thought was quite very actually very interesting with the issues and the way he deals with issues like caste politics in a school environment. I think is very interesting. He really takes the issue and he goes at it. He really goes at it and he explores it from different angles, and he keeps digging. I like that about it. He doesn't rest. He keeps going at it. uh, Otherwise, there are some interesting. I saw some what else did I see recently? I saw one called Fairy Folk by this guy Karan Gaur. He also lives somewhere around here in Goa. Uh, that was pretty interesting. At least the first half I really enjoyed. Uh, I thought it was quite fresh, and it's got this indie spirit, which you don't see so much in Indian films. You see them more in Hollywood films. It's got this Hollywood indie spirit, which I thought was very cool. Mm, yeah, I mean these are uh, yeah, with Indian films, these are the ones I want to see. The A big problem with generally, at least with Indian indie films, the one we read about at festivals, you don't really get to watch them uh, because you got to really seek them out, right, to find them. I try as much as possible. I also someone who's on the jury of a festival or something like that will have access to it, and they might let you watch it. Or somebody who's working on some aspect of a certain film, they let you watch it. But otherwise, it's not so easy to get your hands on the film. I'll say this for my film as well, uh, because I don't have distribution's an issue, right? I don't have distribution in India. I have distribution in the UK, but I don't have distribution in India, which is quite strange. Um, so generally, with me, when people write to me and say, "Hey, man," lots of people who just straight up write out and say, "Hey, I'd like to watch your film." I send them a link, right? I don't know, and I know there are other filmmakers who do this as well because you want people to watch your film. I also know there are filmmakers uh, who will not let you and I can understand that as well. So it's I don't know, this thing of being able to just watch each other's films, I think shouldn't be such a challenge, right? I think it should come more easily in that way. But yeah.
So my last question is, so what advice would you give to like filmmakers?
Ah, I don't know what advice I would say to people who want to make their films. Try and make something to begin with. In the sense, just it's okay to make bad films as long as you realize they're bad and you know what to improve on. Um, but it's important to make stuff. because there's a lot while making it you learn a lot of things. There are lots of things you can know in theory, but the practical aspect of it, actually making it, teaches you so much. It also teaches you so much. There's a lot of what you write on a page, and when it you go about making it, there is so much that changes, and you need to go through that process. It's fine even if you make nonsense, uh, but I think it's very important to go through this process. Don't be in a hurry to spend money on your films. uh, Try and do it for as little money as possible. And yeah, I'd say watch films, read. I would certainly encourage people to read, especially short fiction. I think short fiction is a big short fiction, that short stories sort of that way, structurally they work really well for films as opposed to the novel, which is a lot more detailed. And with a novel you'll have to cast off a lot of stuff and strip it down. But with short fiction you have to build, actually, more than taking things away. You'd have to build certain aspects up, and I think short fiction that way is great reading material, for especially for fiction filmmakers. With documentary, I'd say if you find something interesting, pursue it and try to talk to the people involved with whatever it is that you find interesting. And yeah, docu that way is a lot simpler with regard to starting out. Finally, the film you want to make might transform, but it is easy to go with a camera. You talk to somebody and say, hey, can I talk to you about this? And they might say yes, they might say no, but if you don't ask, you'd never know. So yeah, that's the advice I'd give the filmmakers. You got to make stuff.